Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rings of Power Season 2 discussion here on my channel. For those of you returning, this is an ongoing series I do where I try to discuss every episode of Rings of Power Season 2 as it comes out. As always, I look forward to discussing the episode with you, hearing your thoughts and opinions on it, and if you have anything you'd like to add, feel free to leave a comment down below. As always, I like to extend an invitation to keep our comment section friendly, positive, and avoid hate speech. I do not condone that here on my channel. This week's episode was a lot of fun. It played perfectly off of last week's episode. I'm really liking the direction they're ramping everything up. There's a lot to talk about, so we're just going to get right into it. If you enjoy the video and you'd like to see more of these discussion style videos or just other fantasy content in general, feel free to subscribe. If you want to see more of my minor musings, feel free to check me out on Twitter. I'll have a link in the description down below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Season 2, Episode 6, Where Is He? Now, right off the bat, before I even get into the episode, I do just want to say I was not a fan of the title of this episode. I felt like the show has done a really good job up until now of every episode feels like it could be a chapter title you would find in The Lord of the Rings. And in many instances, the episode titles are even inspired heavily from chapter titles in the Lord of the Rings books. But I digress, that's really a minor issue. Starting off the episode, we finally get to see Arondir again. He has been hot on the trail of the orcs. Not really a lot to say about this scene, it's just kind of thrown in to remind us that, yep, Arondir is following them and he will probably meet up with everybody in the next episode. He does find a map of Eregion on one of the orcs that he kills. There's not really much to say about it. I'm excited to see how he'll play into the broader scope. I'm excited to see him interact with more elves. So far, he's kind of just been on his own, so I'm curious to see how he'll kind of fit into the larger scale of the elven society. We then go to the forge in Eregion, where Celebrimbor is deep into the process of trying to figure out how to make the 9 rings work. We see he's really struggling to do it. He gives this sort of Shakespearean monologue when he's talking to one of the pieces that he can't quite get to bend to his will. He is unraveling. Sauron is seeping into his mind. He is making him lose it. So much so that he forgets Mirdania's name. We see him totally space on it, and he kind of gets embarrassed about it. It's a really interesting moment, and just as the tension's sort of building up, Sauron comes in. He's got his brand new outfit, the sort of black feathery thing. I love it. It is such a cool Sauron-esque outfit. I'm surprised nobody commented on it, honestly, because it stands out so much in the best way possible. Sauron tries to reassure Celebrimbor. He puts him at ease, tells him that everything is going fine, just to keep working on it. Convinces Celebrimbor to isolate himself and work on the rings alone. At the same time, he convinces the smiths not to bother him, so he's kind of got it going from both sides. He's got Celebrimbor alone, isolated, and where he wants him. We also see that he's taking control of all the administrative work in Eregion. He's sort of the de facto leader now, as everybody is coming to him to ask for directions, and it is really cool to see how he has just inserted himself into Eregion. When he showed up in episode 2, they wouldn't even let him in, they were trying to throw him out. Now he runs the place. So I love the way that his character has developed over this season. It has been so much fun to watch. The last thing we see is they talk about how there has been no visitors coming and going to Eregion, and they've been finding dead elves, including one with a message carved into his stomach that says, "Where is he?" as Sauron reveals to Mirdania. This sets the tone that Eregion is isolated and trapped, and there is no way in or out except through Adar's army. Speaking of Adar's army, we get that shot where Sauron goes to the top of the walls and it kind of pans over and you see the smoke rising. Why nobody besides Sauron has noticed that there's a giant army at their gate is beyond me, but they're there. We get a really cool conversation between Adar and Galadriel where they talk about Sauron's influence and how he makes it seem like his power is your power. I love everything they say about Sauron. The way this show is handling Sauron is, I say it almost every episode, every discussion I do, I talk about how great a job they're doing with Anatar, Sauron. Charlie Vickers I could not have envisioned a more perfect adaptation for this character. It is being done to perfection. On more of a cinematography standpoint, I really like that they bring back the Dutch angle that we got from the conversation Galadriel and Adar had in Season 1 when he was the prisoner in the barn. They bring it back in this conversation, and I love that continuity. It adds so much to the scene. We learn about Adar's desire for children. I'm curious exactly what this entails, whether or not Sauron just gave him lordship over the orcs, as in, these are your children now. I don't think they're ever going to really get into the weeds of what exactly it meant by Sauron gave him children. But again, it endears this character as somebody who just wants community. He wants a family, and he is determined to protect them. We see that he is going to extreme lengths that his children do not necessarily agree with, which is causing some drama. In the first scene with Arondir, that was a really important piece of context that I forgot to mention. The two orcs were deserters. These guys had followed Adar out of love and admiration, and we're already getting deserters, so clearly there's some dissension among the ranks. And Glug, as we'll see later, he's not totally on board with it either. Within the conversation, Adar brings out Morgoth's crown, which I think it's interesting that they do officially confirm this as Morgoth's crown. For those of you who don't know, in the Silmarillion, when Morgoth was overthrown, his crown was taken, the Silmarils were rent from it, and it was beaten into a collar that was fastened around his neck. Now, Rings of Power does not have access to that part of the Silmarillion, so I can understand why they wouldn't be adapting or referencing that one for one. They legally can't. But I do think they kind of tactfully revolved around it, where Galadriel almost made it seem like, what? There's no way Morgoth's crown could be here. And Adar explains, Sauron reforged it himself. I think that's a kind of tongue-in-cheek moment to kind of allude to the fact that maybe it was destroyed or beaten or morphed, and Sauron took a part of it. I like to think of it as he took scraps of it. I kind of like the headcanon that Morgoth is this giant being. He's not human-sized. So maybe the crown of Morgoth was just this massive thing, and the new crown is just forged from just a splinter that flaked off of it or something. I don't know. Either way, Adar claims that the crown has the ability to kill Sauron when combined with the power of the Elven Rings. Now, there are a few things about this that I don't like. One, I don't like the idea that the Elven Rings are used combatively. That is not their purpose. I don't want to hold that to the show because Adar clearly doesn't understand the rings. He's not an expert on them, so anything he says about them, I'm not willing to take that as lore and truth about what the rings can do. But it is interesting that he thinks that these two objects together have the power to kill Sauron. I'm curious about what exactly makes Morgoth's crown able to kill him. There's nothing really special about it in the lore. It's just made of iron, just a regular old crown. I don't really like the idea that there's only one weapon that can kill Sauron. I mean, I guess it kind of tracks because the show demonstrated us from the beginning that he can't really kill Sauron, because if he survived what happened in episode 1, he can probably survive anything. So clearly they have to use some sort of magical remedy if they truly want to kill him. Spoiler alert, it's not going to happen. My last issue with this is, how on earth does Adar know about the 3 Elven Rings? There are a lot of issues I have with this show, but one of the things I really try to do is always approach something from a theoretical standpoint. I know some people get a little annoyed because it makes it seem like I'm always an apologist for the show, but I do think it is important to try and give things the benefit of the doubt, especially when you enjoy them. I understand that it's not made very clear to the audience, but I think there are some explicit background clues that could allude to what happened. For instance, with the 3 rings, we know that all traffic in and out of Eregion has been stopped. They have killed elves, they have sent messages. It's possible that they interrogated one of them and learned about the rings. They probably asked, what has Sauron been doing? What have you been building in Eregion? Because Halbrand told Adar, he said they're making a power, not of the flesh, but over flesh. So Adar knows they're making something. I don't know. We may get the answers later, we may not. It's not a deal breaker to me, it just felt a little clunky. Speaking of Halbrand, Adar deduces that Halbrand is Sauron, to which Galadriel does not confirm at that time. We then get a quick scene of Elendil in Numenor, where he is standing trial for the skirmish from the night before, or whenever it was. He is asked to denounce his crimes and recognize Pharazôn as the true ruler of Numenor. Now, I want to say that I enjoyed Elendil in Season 1, but I'm really starting to like him a lot more now. I've seen a lot of people make the comparison between Elendil and Ned Stark in terms of their unwavering integrity and honor, and I'm really enjoying that. I mean, visualization aside between the two characters, I totally agree with that, and I love this honor path that they're leaning into with Elendil. I think it makes him a much more compelling character. I love this unwavering faith that he has, and he demonstrates it perfectly in this scene where he refuses to acknowledge Pharazôn as the true ruler and claims that Miriel is the rightful ruler and should be crowned, to which they throw him in the dungeon. You get Belzegar, the kind of right-hand man to Pharazôn now, pulls out a book and is like, if he wants to serve the Valar, maybe he should die by the Valar. And they decide to do something called Trial of the Abyss, which we will get into later. Side note, I was listening to the Lorehounds podcast just earlier today, and I heard one of the hosts mention a little gripe about how in this scene, Kemen's shoulder had magically healed. I did want to point out, if you zoom in on this frame, you can see a sort of shoulder sling. So I just thought that was kind of cool to point out. I missed that my first time too. We then get a vision of Nori and Poppy in danger. We get a quick shot of the Dark Wizard and some sort of dark location. It looks like it's probably where the Stewards live. This makes me a little confused about why the Dark Wizard would go there if he was hunting after the stranger. I'm not going to get into this because we're going to get more from their storyline in future episodes, and I don't really want to waste a lot of time on it in this episode. The stranger talks to Tom Bombadil about his vision, which he says is a kindling from the secret fire or something along those lines. Stranger says he wants to learn how to control the secret fire, which is another huge indication that the stranger is going to be Gandalf, and it's going to fit into his arc. There's a very famous line from the books and used in the movies where Gandalf described himself as a servant of the secret fire, which in the lore, the secret fire is sort of the embodiment of creation. It is this divine power. It is seen as Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Middle-earth's essence. So this idea that the stranger wants to control the secret fire is going to play into his arc, I think, where he learns the humility and understands, no, I'm not here to control it. I am a servant of it. Again, he's not beating the Gandalf allegations. It gets even worse in just a second. Tom Bombadil takes him out to this huge forest of trees where he says, all right, go ahead and take your pick. Your staff's in there somewhere. When you're ready for it, you'll find it. Kind of felt like him being set loose in one of those lots where you go shopping for Christmas trees. I don't know. The stranger talks about the fact that his friends are in danger and he doesn't know if he can spend this time. Again, I mentioned this in my episode 4 discussion. There are clear parallels to Tom Bombadil and Yoda, which I do not like. And now here is the parallel to the stranger and Luke Skywalker. He has the vision of his friends in trouble. The Dark Wizard is attacking them. He has to choose whether to complete his training or go and save his friends. I don't like it. This is the weakest plot for me. I really struggle with it. In regards to him being worried about his friends dying, Tom gives the Gandalf quote, many who die deserve life and many who live deserve death, which feels really out of place in this context. And I can't even say final nail in the coffin because they've really just drummed it up so many times. The stranger is going to be Gandalf. It feels like they are really pandering to an audience here that knows nothing about Gandalf outside of the Jackson films, and so they keep having to allude to it so that they're like, oh my gosh, it was Gandalf. It has been so painfully obvious. I'm so sick of the mystery box format. I honestly don't even care that he's Gandalf anymore. I just want them to just say it, reveal it, and just be done with it. Like, let's move on already. I still don't know how to feel about Tom Bombadil. This might be his last episode. I have some contextual clues within the soundtrack that leaves me to believe he will show up in a future episode just because there's another track he's featured on. But I don't know. I still don't know how to feel about him. I love Rory Kinnear. I love his performance he's giving. I think the character in the show is a cool character. It's just not Tom Bombadil for me. But I think for a general audience, he serves a good point, and his purpose is met. Then we get Nori and Gundabel talking in the Stewar village about the idea of migration versus staying put, because Nori kind of wants all the Stewards to pack up and run away. Gundabel talks about a lot of real Hobbit fundamentals about having a home and generationalism, and I think she's instilling these ideas into Nori. I think Nori is going to play a huge part in the founding of the Shire. She's probably even going to be the one who discovers it, which I don't really have an issue with. I kind of like what they're doing with the Harfoot storyline. I just wish that it wasn't so rushed. but it also doesn't deserve to be in this season. See, this is the issue I have with it, is that the Harfoots are endearing, they are charming, and they ultimately benefit from more screen time. The only difference is that they don't deserve the screen time right now with how little we get. If we had 12, 15 episodes, then absolutely. I don't hate the Harfoot storyline. I enjoy its inclusion, but it's really hard, especially this season. You see them really struggling to carve out time for them, which leads into the next scene you get with Poppy and Merrimack, which feels totally tacked on and really out of place. I mean, they've had like 2 scenes together. I don't have a huge issue with it. I mean, it's there for who it's there for. I really didn't like the comment she made after they had the kiss, Poppy and Merrimack, because I thought the moment was cute and it was fine and it stood on its own, but the whole, did you eat lizard for lunch? For those of you who've watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, this felt like the eye roll moment from the Ember Island Players episode.
Wait, did you have pickled fish for dinner?
Goodbye, Saga. I have important room duties to take care of. And yes, I did have pickled fish.
We then get Sauron and Khazad-Dum. He asks for mithril. The dwarves say no, which surprises him, and he leaves upset and presumably without mithril. We'll get into that later. He does get a quick vision of the Balrog on his way out. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to imply. I think it's just more of him sensing the presence of the Balrog down below the mines. I don't really know if he's going to do anything with that information. I think that's more a visual cue for the audience than it is for Sauron. While he was there, he did mention that Eregion will be under siege, and King Durin goes full ironmonger and decides, we are going to supply people with weapons when the war starts, but we gotta hold off so that they're more desperate and they really want to jack up the prices, which is despicable, if not completely founded in real-world examples. Durin the Fourth kind of looks at him dead in the eyes like, take the ring off, you won't, no balls. King Durin's like, yeah, I won't take it off because I'm not a slave to it. And he's like, yeah, you are. And he smacks him, which I guess is ring strength, or it's just dramatic effect. But yeah, the family drama in Khazad-Dum is another major highlight for me this season. I love the way it's playing out. Durin goes home all upset and annoyed about what happened. I love how Disa's immediate reaction whenever there's drama between him and his father is to immediately recommend staging a coup or deposing the king. She's ride or die, and she's so fiery and intense. I really love Disa's character. But Durin's not behind it at all. He's like, you want to humiliate him? You want to make the people turn on him? And we get this really human dwarf scene between them where we just, I don't know, I love their connection. It's the beating heart of the show. This has been said by many people. I love the bit about even though he's been corrupted, Durin still sees his father when he looks in his eyes. But they decide they need to do something about it. So they elect to basically do the dwarven equivalent of chaining themselves to a tree to prevent it from being chopped down, which is they're going to go into the mines and stop the dwarves from mining. We then go to Numenor. We see them blowing the horns to summon the worm for the sea trial. Elendil is in jail, and Eregion goes to him and pleads with him to reconsider and beg forgiveness from Pharazôn and recognize him as the ruler of Numenor. We get this really interesting part where Elendil talks about confusing pride for integrity, or he's like, if pride is truly all you see, then we have no more words left to share. It's really heartbreaking seeing what's happening to this family. Again, Eregion needed more screen time. She is another victim of this season's pacing. I understand why they're giving so much screen time to other arcs, but Eregion has really suffered. A lot of people are viewing her character as one-dimensional or irrational, and I think that there is a lot to be said about the way she's acting and why she is acting. And again, it goes back into me being an apologist. You do have to sort of dig deeper into the background, analyze these characters to get that sort of not surface level information, which again astounds me because in other shows like Game of Thrones, you get people who applaud it for the fact that you do have to dig deep to figure out what people are thinking. And then in shows like this, people are like, oh, it's not clear, it's stupid, and I don't know, you can't have it both ways. But again, Elendil sticks to his faith, which I love. Eregion tries to bring Muriel in to guilt trip him, and she also agrees. Take the deal. Do not let yourself die for this. Elendil gives this great speech about having to live the faith you believe in. Again, this episode really bumped Elendil up a couple points with me. I enjoy him a lot more now. Not that I didn't before, but he's I mean, I can see him deserving the main character position he's going to be getting in the future seasons. There's also some clear romantic tension between him and Muriel, which I'm not really opposed to, even though it isn't really a canonical aspect of their characters. I think the way the show is handling it is really well done. We then go back to Khazad-Dum. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this, but we get Disa using a sonic blast to summon bats to stop the dwarves from mining. It felt a little clunky and kind of cartoonish for me, but gets the point across. They are going to try and prevent the king from mining deeper. We then go back to Numenor, where we do get the trial by Abyss, where Elendil is being prepared to get thrown into the water and be judged by the sea worm. Muriel steps in, volunteers as tribute, and says he was acting on my orders. I have a right to do the trial for him, which Belzegar's like, oh, damn, yeah, it's in the rules, I guess she can. So she goes into the water, the worm grabs her, deems her worthy, I guess, and she passes the test. Elendil pronounces her queen, and you get all these people cheering, which I saw Nerd of the Rings bring this up. I totally agree. The people of Numenor are very confusing. They have not done a really good job of illustrating how the society as a whole feels about these issues. It kind of just feels like the room is filled with these nameless extras, and they will just cheer and agree with whatever the character is shouting at the time. Like, I think they need to do a better job of distinguishing between who is the faithful and who is the Kingsman, and showing that contrast. I do think the fact that Muriel passed this test is going to play into a bit of lore where, this is slight spoilers, but in the books, Pharazôn ends up marrying Muriel, even though they are cousins, and I can see a way how the show could do this now, because if she's going to gain more favor, he might end up doing it to try and placate the faithful. Speaking of Nerd of the Rings, he brought up another good point about crowd sizes and how nothing ever really feels lived in. You've only got like at most 30 people in a scene in a crowd. I did want to point out something about that though. In this scene, if you actually look at the top, the cliffs are lined with people. I did not notice that at all my first watch. And that's not to make excuses for the fact that yes, the crowd sizes do feel underwhelming. They make the kingdoms feel smaller, but I think that's at least somewhat of an effort. Pharazôn spirals out after this. He caves and looks into the Palantir, sees a vision of Halbrand. Now, it's kind of unclear what he gleaned from this. He might have also seen more than we saw, but it kind of seems like he's realized Halbrand is Sauron, and I'm really curious to see how that's going to play into the idea of kind of how he reacts to Muriel's quest. I don't know. I'm interested to see what he's going to do with that information. The idea that he recognizes Halbrand is Sauron is sort of cemented by the idea that Galadriel's voiceover, where she confirms, yes, Halbrand is Sauron, is played over this shot of Pharazôn. After she delivers the line, we go back to the legions of orcs, where we see Galadriel has agreed, fine, I will help you defeat Sauron, and Adar alludes to the fact that he was actually just using Galadriel for information, and she's already given and revealed more than he could have ever hoped for. She kind of fires back with, oh, you're not going to be able to defeat Eregion with this platoon of orcs or whatever, and he's like, oh, I got more than that, and kind of unveils this massive army. Siege of Eregion is building up, and in fact, it begins in the very next scene. You see he blows the horn, which he pulls from a very reluctant Glug, who he does not want to fight this battle. He does not think that it is worth the lives of orcs that will be lost in the effort. But anyway, he summons the legions, and the siege begins. We cut to Eregion. We see all the citizens are kind of running around in a panic. Sauron pops out and takes this really ornate-looking dagger and cuts his hand. I'll go back to that later. I have a theory about it. As Celebrimbor overhears the commotion from up top of the forge. He tries to open the window to check, but Annatar appears and boom, blocks the window. He tries to prevent him from going outside. He says, hey, forging the rings right now is your absolute top priority. You can't focus on anything else. Celebrimbor is unhinged. He is unraveling. We see him push Sauron against the wall, which really surprised me. We see him pushing back. He's upset. He's pissed. He is not having a good time. He goes outside anyway, and Sauron conjures a vision where when he opens the doors, it is sunny and blissful, and you see all the people in Eregion are just having a good day at the park. Sauron comes out and pumps him up, talking about how, oh, when his work is done, the rings are gonna make the Silmarils look like a mere footnote in the annals of history, which the Silmarils are what his grandfather Feanor made. That's what he's famous for. They're kind of considered the greatest object ever made by mortal hands in Middle-earth or semi-immortal beings. He gives him Feanor's hammer, and he gives him a kind of weird container full of mithril. He says the purest they've found, mithril dust from Narvi. Now, I've seen a few theories about this. One is that he stole it on his way out, which tracks. The other is that it isn't mithril at all. We know that Celebrimbor is in a vision at this moment, so the world around him is augmented and uncandid to what the real world is at that moment. So it could not be mithril, and I mentioned earlier when Sauron cuts his hand, I was going to go back to that later. Some people have speculated it's Sauron's blood that he's put into, that's why it kind of looks like a vial, and that he's going to forge the rings, not with mithril this time, but with Sauron's blood, which I think could track, because if we want to talk about the magical properties of mithril, I'm sure that there are magical properties within the blood of a Maya, which is basically Middle-earth's equivalent of demigods. Gandalf is one of these too, so are the Balrogs, Saruman, etc. This schmoozing kind of works on Celebrimbor, and he relaxes and goes back inside and says, alright, I'll finish the rings. Then we get what is probably my favorite shot of the season, maybe not still shot, but transition shot, where the vision from daylight shifts to the dark of night, and you've got all the people around that suddenly burst into commotion and start running to and from. I love the way they did this shot. It is so cool. It's like a mix between a dolly zoom and like a pan at the same time. I don't know how they did it. Massive soundstage, all these functioning lights, the choreography in the scene, top notch. Absolutely delivered. What a way to start off the siege, which is immediately what happens next. You know, Sauron kind of steps up and opens his arms and is like, all right, let's do it. The catapults the fire into the city, and the last shot is one shoots towards the camera, and poof, the episode ends. Now, this was another really solid episode. I think the storylines are doing a great job of branching off into each new episode. I think they're all being set up really well. I cannot wait to see where the Celebrimbor and Adar story is going. They're doing it as good as I imagined they would. This is literally everything I'd ever hoped for from this adaptation. They're doing it. I love everything about it. Everything about Eregion and Khazad-Dum this season has been top notch, and we really are heading towards an epic conclusion. I really hope this season sticks the landing, because as of right now, I am blown away by it. A lot of my opinions about which storylines are strong and which are weak remain the same. The ones that aren't impressing me continue to not impress me, and the ones that are impressing me continue to be the standouts, with the only exception I think being Numenor, which has slowly been growing on me throughout the season. The only issue again is that it's just not getting the development it deserves, though I am starting to care more about it, and hopefully the general audiences as well. The Rune storyline, it is what it is. I wish I could say I understand why they're doing it, but I don't yet, because they haven't told us as an audience why they're spending so much time on it. Why is it so important to the story? And I'm just sitting here hoping that the payoff will be worth the journey and the time invested. I'm excited to see how the Siege of Eregion pans out. It seems like they kind of set up the next episode to be fully just only the Siege of Eregion. I don't think we're going to get any other storylines. It's just going to be an hour straight of just battle, which the show has kind of hyped it up to be like their own version of Helm's Deep, which has me really interested to see how it's going to live up to that. I'm not going to hold it to that estimation because I don't want to let nostalgia cloud my judgment, but I'm really, really excited for next week's episode. Overall, this episode I would give an 8 out of 10. Thank you so much if you made it to the end of the video. We are so close to being done with this series. I cannot believe it. But if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of these videos in the future. If you do want to see more of my daily thoughts and musings, feel free to check me out on Twitter. And that's about everything I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.